From the 1870s right through to the 1950s, a specialised organised crime gang of thieves operated in London, and the police were chasing to keep up. As long as there have been shops, there have been shoplifters, and one operating in a capital city was hardly unusual. This one was on another level, and they lived hard and fast. They called themselves the 40 Elephants, and what makes them different, apart from their strange name, was that they were all women. The exact reason why they were called this has been lost to time. It is known that they originated in the South London borough of Lambeth, Elephant and Castle. If you passed them in the street, you probably would not notice, as they were all well dressed and very polite, and see them in the more fashionable shops in the West End, and not think any more about it. This all-woman gang of shoplifters targeted upmarket department stores, becoming well known and widely feared, and spent their shady earnings on glamorous outfits and partying. Many of them were partners or relatives of the Elephant and Castle gang, a long-running male criminal organisation who operated out of their local pub, the Elephant and Castle Tavern. The all-female gang was notable for its longevity and skill in avoiding police detection. In the late 1880s, this part of South London was an impoverished working-class neighbourhood. A survey identified the many clusters of slum housing around the Elephant and Castle. The inhabitants were termed as the lowest class of vicious, semi-criminal people. Families lived together in cramped, decaying terrace houses with poor conditions and sanitation. Rents were high and employment was low, so it is not surprising that some looked at criminal activity as a way out of the squalor that they were born into. Life was a revolving door of organised thefts, lavish spending, and prison sentences. Stealing was, after all, for them, a route out of poverty, and that ran deep in their families. The 40 Elephants gang were notorious and active for many decades, specialising in large-scale shoplifting, or hoisting, as it was referred to, as well as burglary and pickpocketing. They were so named for their base in the Elephant and Castle, as well as their large numbers. At least 75 were part of the gang across the generations. There were aunts, cousins, sisters or mothers, as it was very much a family affair and a way of life that was passed on. Known for elaborate disguises with hidden pockets in their stylish clothes, they targeted fashionable West End shops, stealing jewellery and furs. The gang was also known to masquerade as housemaids to wealthy families, often using false references, before ransacking their homes with fellow accomplices. They operated with cunning and teamwork under female leaders like Mary Carr and Alice Diamond, and were said also to have a presence in other parts of the country. There are mentions of young women and girls connected with or acting as accomplices to a male gang named the 40 Thieves as early as 1828. The members of this gang were between the ages of 10 and 20. Both the male and female members carried tattooed marks on their hands in the form of dots made with Indian ink, by which they recognized each other. In 1896, their leader at the time, Minnie Chamberlain, was committed to Wormwood Scrubs for 12 months for having been convicted of larceny. The earliest mention of the 40 Elephants in newspapers dates to 1873, and police records from London indicate that female shoplifters had been active in the area since the late 18th century. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, women's clothing was multi-layered, so ideal for hiding stolen goods. The original members wore expensive, fashionable clothing, which was modified to include hidden pockets. The 40 elephants enhanced their outfits even further, tailoring their dresses to allow them to easily squirrel away expensive items and walk away from high-end department stores unnoticed. They even sewed hidden pockets into their hats to conceal the loot. They were allied with separate male-led gangs, but were independent, with strict rules and a clear hierarchy. The first identifiable leader of the gang was Mary Carr, who was born in Holborn in 1862. By the time she was 14, she had been convicted of shoplifting, and since her mother had died, and her father, also a thief and a fraudster, was nowhere to be found, she was incarcerated at a prison for fallen women, run by the Church of England in Kent, and by the 1870s had become involved with the gang, and that she steadily advanced through the hierarchy to become a prominent member, eventually earning her the leadership position and the nickname Queen of the Forties. Carr played an essential role in turning a loosely organized group of petty thieves into the well-oiled machine it eventually became, helping them to refine their strategy. She enforced discipline and turned her home, 118 Stamford Street in South London, into the gang's first base of operations. The street had such a bad reputation that it was called one of the ugliest and sordid streets in London, and she was later romantically involved with the leader of the Elephant and Castle gang, Alf Gorman. Her leadership saw the gang's activities become increasingly organized. Her charismatic leadership style made her so famous during her life that she was claimed to have been the model for a number of famous paintings. With increased organization and activity came heightened scrutiny. Her grip on the gang seems to have been lessened after a case in 1896 in which she was charged with and convicted of the kidnapping of a 6-year-old boy, Michael McGee, from Epsom Races, with the intention of selling him to a childless couple. The youngster was found at Carr's home after his disappearance, following an anonymous tip-off to the police. She was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Apparently, the child's mother did not want him back, and he ended up in care. She was also charged with as well a vicious gang attack on a female rival, Nellie Stanley, that same year, and was jailed. At her trial, 2 detective sergeants named Gray and Brogan informed the court that the prisoner was known as the leader of a gang of young female shoplifters who infested the Strand. After her release 3 years later, he was arrested again in 1900 for receiving stolen goods and was sentenced to 2 years. Various women stepped up to be leader, but were in turn eventually jailed, one of them being Helen Sheen, who was arrested and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment for drugging and stealing from a man. Having been released from her final prison term, Carr moved to Manchester, where, posing as a socialite, was invited to the sort of functions where an accomplished thief and con artist might spend a profitable couple of hours. It is thought that she died in 1924, but the 40 elephants did not die with her. The next queen was Alice Diamond in 1915, known as Diamond Alice, being an accomplished jewel thief in West End hotels. Shop stock had also begun to be more visibly displayed on tables and hangers, so it was easy to steal, as, by the late 1800s, shopping had transformed into a leisure pastime. The gang raided large stores of the fashionable West End of the city, of which there were around 100 by 1900. They were like a swarm of locusts. Due to the modest attitudes of the era, female customers of all classes were afforded privacy from the store staff, giving female shoplifters the opportunity to escape notice. 2 or 3 women would go into a store when it was busy and ask to look at some of the items for sale, then likely asking to see some other goods and keep looking at the different articles until they get a quantity on the counter. When the shop assistant was engaged getting some fresh articles from the shelves, one of them generally contrives to slip something under her cloak or shawl, while the other manages to keep up the distraction, and their clothes were specially adapted to conceal what had been taken. This was more sophisticated and organised than simply opportunist theft. Police and shop detectives struggled to keep up with the scale of the crimes. Most of the criminal activities by women of all classes went undetected, and even when they were caught, middle-class women shoplifters often did not suffer official prosecution. The shop assistant's hesitancy to accuse what appeared to be a respectable wealthy customer of theft therefore was a benefit to the female thieves. Besides shoplifting, the gang also developed sidelines, such as looting houses and blackmailing individuals. Gang members used false references to get employed as maids and then robbed the houses of their employers. Some managed to seduce men into brief affairs and then blackmailed them with threats of ruining their reputations. Another tactic that the 40 Elephants also perfected was approaching well-to-do looking men on the street under pretense of asking for directions. When the man was showing the young woman the way, other gang members would appear and claim to have witnessed the attack. The victim would usually part company with his valuables in order to avoid embarrassment. Another aspect that set the Elephants apart from other criminals was the fact that they had a set of rules, which they called the Hoisters or Shoplifters Code. Those associated were expected to adhere and comply. The rules included no drinking before a raid and early hours to bed. Proceeds from a job are equally shared by the group members involved, no matter what their role. Members must not steal from each other, including their money or boyfriends. Their activities, particularly in Victorian and Edwardian London, demonstrated that women during that era could carve out a place in the criminal world. The gang were known for their extravagant style, but you wouldn't catch them wearing most of the items they'd stolen. One of their main strengths was their skill at fencing the goods they shoplifted, as they would sell them to their network of specialist fencers, the proceeds being passed back to the gang, less a commission. Cheap loot went to street market traders, jewelry to pawnbrokers, and clothes were sold to shady shops that were willing to replace labels and remodel designs. Some of the fencers were arrested, but could not be convicted. For example, Ada MacDonald was arrested as a suspected fence in 1910. She used ledgers of suspect authenticity to convince the authorities that the goods in her possession were the product of legitimate financial transactions. The gang spent their money on high fashion and fun. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, they gathered in London entertainment venues like music halls. After the First World War ended in 1918, you could find them among the elite of Soho's blossoming nightclub scene, and they led decadent lifestyles. Part of their earnings were used to finance party events and to spend lavishly at clubs, pubs and restaurants, which the gang members frequented. Around the time Mary Carr was jailed in 1886, another future gang leader was born, called Alice Diamond, nicknamed Diamond Annie due to the number of rings that she wore. She had been born in the Lambeth Workhouse Hospital in 1886. The 1911 census shows that she was 14 and living with her parents and siblings in Southwark, South London. By the time she was 17, she already had a string of larceny convictions, and early in World War I, she was arrested for using fake ID to gain access to an ammunition factory, possibly trying to procure explosives with which to blow up safes. By 1915, aged 19, she'd risen through South London's criminal underworld to become the new Queen of the 40 Elephants. Ambitiously, they carried out a series of highly organized jewel thefts during her leadership, where they posed as guests at high society events. Hidden in plain sight, they pickpocketed jewelry while they were there and gathered information that they could later use to stage burglaries. When pressure from the police got too much for the group, Diamond spread her criminal enterprise to the provinces, targeting stores as far away as Coventry and Liverpool, and using cars to travel. She never married, though she did have a relationship with Burt MacDonald, one of the leaders of the all-male Elephant Gang, the male crime group that operated in the area. When various gang members were arrested and convicted, their prison sentences tended to be short. It was seemingly a risk worth taking. They could be sentenced to either 12 months of hard labor or 3 years incarceration. Once released, they returned to the gang. Several of the women remained with the gang for a relatively long time. They sold goods worth thousands of pounds and earned enough money to financially support their husbands, some of whom included both idle men who lounged at home and inmates of the British prison system. The gang eventually became well known in the areas with the high-class shops, which they typically targeted, and their mere presence could cause alarm, eliminating the secrecy required for their activities. Their response to this challenge was to expand their activities from London to other British towns, where they were less well known. During the 20th century, they invested in fast cars to transport their ill-gotten gains, using getaway vehicles which could outrun the police. They would also travel by train to a town outside of London with empty suitcases, which they would leave at railway stations. During their return trip, the suitcases were filled with stolen goods. The 40 Elephants were very territorial. Other shoplifters who were not part of their circle and stole from shops on their turf were forced to pay the gang a percentage of their takings. If they refused to pay, the gang arranged beatings and kidnappings of the offenders until the payment was received. Their heyday was in the interwar period, and Alice Diamond ruled with absolute authority. Over 70 direct members of the gang were operating in the 20s and 30s. They were still in existence after World War II, as new family members replaced old hands. Such high-profile robberies caused police to intensify attempts to catch them, and Diamond was finally arrested in 1925, highlighting her impressive levels of organization and control, and she would retire from the leadership of the gang in the 1930s. She was sent to Holloway Prison for 18 months. Her offences were extensive, like wounding with intent, burglary, riot, damage, and assault. When she was released in June 1926, a new queen, Lillian Kendall, eventually took charge, but things could never get back to how they were in earlier years. When Diamond left the scene, the gang entered a period of decline. Things were never quite the same. They were supplanted by the rise of new, more violent gangs, and saw their numbers dwindle during World War II, and they had all but vanished by the 1950s. The role of leader was taken over by Maggie Hill, who was arrested in 1939 for blinding a policeman with a hatpin and sentenced to 4 years in Holloway Prison. On her release, she retired from shoplifting and was succeeded by Shirley Pitts, who had been taught shoplifting by Diamond and other gang members in the 1940s. She was given the name Queen of the Shoplifters by the newspapers. Among her acquaintances were Ronnie Knight, the Cray twins, and Charlie Wilson. Pitts would lead a much reduced group, which had been in steep decline since the late 1950s, until her death in 1992.